Hey everyone, welcome to today's post-production panel. My name is Owen Danoff. I'm a writer, filmmaker, and entertainment journalist. I am very excited to speak with everybody about their recent projects, so please welcome to the room, virtual stage, uh, composer and head of creative at Minus 5dB and co-composer and additional music composer on Nightmares of Nature, Chris Elmslie. Uh, Composer on Royale on Apple TV Plus, Jeff Toyne, uh, sound designer on the Danish drama series Families Like Us, Peter Stormvik, MPSE, uh, editor on A Very Jonas Christmas Movie, Peter Hagen, and the composer of I Fought the Law and Runaway, Luke Richards.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks, guys, for being here. I'm very excited to chat with you all. Uh, one quick one for everyone, I think, to start, and then we'll go into more individual questions. But uh, I was wondering if each of you could kind of quickly define your role in post-production, beginning with at what point you come on board a project, and then kind of explaining how your creativity and your tastes help shape the final product, the result. Let's start with Peter Stormvik, or Peter S, as they would say on The Bachelorette.
Thank you, Owen. Um, well, my title on this specific series was sound designer and re-recording mixer. I co-sound designed this with one of my great colleagues called Hans Miller. Usually, I will try to get on a project as early as I can. So even during the writing phases or development of how the series, what it's about and stuff. On this particular project, I joined while they were editing, so I was quite late to the party. Hans, though, was already on board before shooting, um, which I think is very important for a role like mine, is in order to kind of get your ideas in. It needs to be as early as possible, even going into like ideas or designing stuff before they actually shoot. It will have some impact on the principal shooting, sometimes how you will shoot a scene or and how other like a functions on a film set or in a film production will shape their ideas. Yeah.
That's great. How about you, Peter? Okay.
Yeah, so I'm a picture editor. I was the picture editor on A Very Jonas Christmas Movie. I typically start my work when they first start shooting. There may be some meetings in advance, tone meetings, etc., but I typically start on the first day of shooting. And for me, the process really starts with performance. And I consider myself sort of a key collaborator of the actors, even though I don't interact with them directly. It's my job to work with all the goods they bring and bring the best out of it. And I was lucky on A Very Jonas Christmas Movie that the Jonas Brothers were fantastic and very willing to make fun of themselves and be have fun poked at them. And it was a treat when you have a cast like that that's willing to be made fun of them. They were playing versions of themselves, so they gave me a lot to work with. And so that's sort of where the process starts. It always starts with performance for me, and it can carry through, the very end of the film. From being on the mix stage to be involved in that process of honing in the sound, the music, the color correction, the visual effects. Those are all areas that I tend to, lend my voice to. So by the end, my feedback has been, involved in every stage that happens once the film has been shot. But again, it's for me, it really does start with working with the actors, working with the director, and again, was blessed on a Jonas movie to have great performers and also a great director who was willing to let me experiment and try things that might have been bad ideas. Sometimes you have to try bad ideas to find good ideas. And Jessica Yu, the director, was willing to go along on that ride. So it was a great experience.
That is great. Luke, how about you?
Yeah, on both Runaway and I Fought the Law, was lucky enough to come on quite early at the script stage before they'd even started shooting, which on Runaway I think was particularly important because one of the sort of arcs that a character goes through is she's involved in a cult. And so the producers and the director, they wanted the scenes where this character is singing a chant on screen. So we kind of needed to lock that melody down. And then the intention was to take this sort of Gregorian chant type thing and then integrate it into the score, particularly in the latter episodes of the show when we kind of go deep down the rabbit hole. So that was quite exciting. And also, having done two Harlan Coben shows before with these guys, I think there was a lot of emphasis on kind of broadening out the scale on this show, the way that they'd shot it, the locations and things like that. And they wanted to reflect that in the music and try something new. And so we had this kind of, okay, we've got this vocal element. How can we kind of take that into a lot of the existing stylistic cues of the Harlan Coben shows, which is usually very electronic. So initially you're like, geez, how is a Gregorian chant going to go in a music blender with a lot of synths, and what's going to come out the other end? Is it going to sound listenable? But luckily it actually worked incredibly well. And I think we ended up having quite a unique and different score. And then with I Fought the Law, that was a similar, bizarrely, even though it's a completely different type of show based on a true story, we had the woman whose life it's based upon is still alive. So she gave us certain key musical details about her daughter, who in real life is murdered, and that's what the show's about, and what her daughter's favorite pieces of music were, which were it was a piece of Schubert music. And again, that was really useful to, in meetings, we talked about that early on, like, okay, how can we put bits, little quotations of this music in the show? Because this character is gone very early on in the series, but we can keep the spirit of her alive throughout the score in little subtle points that, if you've got a very good ear for Schubert, you'll pick up on, hopefully. So that's when I sort of came on, and it's not always the case, as we all know, to come on that early, but I love it because it just lets you have a bit more time to have a bit more conceptual planning, and hopefully do something that's a bit more unique and exciting.
Every composer I've ever talked to who's come on early has been like, this is the greatest way to do this.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Chris, let's turn to you, kind of when you came on and how you helped shape the vibe of your project.
Yeah, sure. So I guess, unlike Luke was saying, we didn't come on too early. Me and Stuart Roslin, who was the other composer on this project. And so really we kind of came in, they already had their shots, and what quite often happens in nature documentary is that they take their shots and they can build a story from that, and often the story is changing and ever changing, and the narration is changing to kind of carve that story. So with Nightmares of Nature, it was obviously a horror. It's a horror show, and so we're trying to build a nature documentary score, but in a horror style. And so what we really wanted to do is to create a soundscape, a horror soundscape, unique to this show that we can really work on. So I guess whilst we're waiting to see how the story develops, it did give us a bit of time to really dig in and find sound source and find these sounds, have a listen to some of the Foley and some of the shots we have, and use that to inspire the soundscapes we're creating, find some cool synth sounds and found sounds, and just play around for a while and really distort them, or just kind of just throw everything at it to find some cool sounds that we can build this foundation to then build the score out of as we move further into the project.
That's great. And last but not least, Jeff, how about you?
On Palm Royale, I got a bit of both. The first season, I came on pretty late in the process, with a couple of weeks before the first dub mix for the first episode. But of course, second season, we had all the time to to know that it's coming and to try and prepare for it. So the it's funny, even if I come on late, I still start with the script. That's my first entry into the project, and there's a lot of information, for everybody there. So the we were talking a little earlier. The treat for second season was to be involved in pre-production and production, because the show has some on-screen song performances. The actors sing on screen, and so I was lucky to be involved in the arranging and the production and the recording of the songs, and that also meant days on set while they were being performed and shot, and so that was a fun extra. It's usually composers not a lot of time on set, so that was a treat.
Next question. I'm curious, kind of for Jeff, Luke, and Peter Hagen, as much as you want to speak to this. I'm curious about kind of the interplay between music and editing, like when you all are getting rough cuts or early picture. I'd love to know what, if any, collaborative process there is between editing and music, and how much maybe early score affects the edit and how much edit affects the score.
Well, the editor is usually has a lot of responsibility for the temp score in the episodes, and depending if they have a music editor that they're working with, and a music supervisor. Often the showrunners and the directors are also able to provide selections that they think might be useful for temp. But at the end of the day, it really falls to the picture editors these days to cut the temp score, and so they have a lot of influence over how the early versions of the episodes are going to be, and they've already done a lot of thinking about decisions that we're going to go over again later when we spot the episodes, about where music starts, where music stops, and what kind of role music is going to be playing moment to moment in the episodes. It's great to be able to dialogue early in the process with editors, and I've had picture editors often looking for temp music, looking for music that they can use to cut in for temp, and I sometimes find myself in the Spider-Man meme where I wanted to get the temp music from you so I can get ideas for the music, but I wanted to get ideas from you. So that can happen. But actually, it happens when you're working on a really original show for which it's not clear what's already gone before that you can draw from. This has a very original sound, and nothing already exists that we can use for our temp. So that everyone's really challenged to provide temp for a show like that.
Yeah, if I can sort of jump in off that, yeah, I think it is an interesting relationship with temping and the editors. And because I came on these shows quite early, I was feeding ideas into the edit. And even just like I would get sent the dailies at the end of every week, or sometimes the director would just call me up and be like, "Oh, we've got this montage scene, and we can't really find anything that's like getting it over the line in a good way. Can you just like take a look at it?" And like that can be scary, but it can also be really exciting because, like Jeff said, you're not having someone else laying out a musical template, and you kind of get to start with a completely blank slate. And I think also it just helps everybody kind of hone in on the direction for the show at an earlier point, rather than like, here's an edited episode and you go off and do music and everyone's like, oh my god, that's not it, we weren't expecting that at all. And then on Runaway as well, because we had that luxury of time that we all love, it was very similar, that I was getting sent scenes and they were just like, oh, can you temp this with some, have you got any music from the previous shows we did that you can, dive into the stems and just build something, because it's a complex scene. And I love doing that because it's just a way to get your fingers under the show early. I'm sure Jeff and Chris would agree that when you're writing music for a show, there's a certain point where you just get it and it kind of starts flowing naturally. And I think the earlier you can get that feeling of being like, okay, I've got my paintbrushes, I've got my paints, now I know what I'm doing. So if that involves feeding temp or writing bits of temp or having dialogues with the picture editors and all that sort of stuff, then I'm always for that. I love it.
Yeah, and to add to all that, I think what Jeff said about the relationship between composers and the picture editor, the Spider-Man meme is a good way to put it. And I think what Luke said, in the best case scenario, it's a dialogue, right, where there's a
Yeah.
little bit of back and forth. As a picture editor, I try to my theory is that you need to make the edit work without music before you introduce music, because music's always going to make things feel better. But if you put music in too soon, I feel you might overlook certain issues that you need to deal with before you get to the music. And Jeff mentioned how it can be challenging on a new project when there is no temp, what the temp is going to be. On A Very Jonas Christmas, that challenge was that it was a musical, and there was already 8 musical numbers with songs written for it, but it also needed a score. And it was a Christmas movie, and that has certain sounds and themes that are specific, but also need to be specific to the movie you're working on. So it was quite challenging to find pieces of score that would harmonize with the existing songs while also, doing what it needed to do to satisfy being a Christmas movie. And so I always love to involve the composer early. I try to send edits to the composer as early as the director will allow me to send edits to the composer. And I try to send it, as dry as I can. Sometimes, for spotting purposes, I'll put a piece of music in saying, from like here to here, we're going to want something. But once you do involve the composer, that's when I like to maybe start doing more temp work, because then it's a dialogue and it's not so handed down from myself, who's not a musician, to somebody who is a musician. I like to start the dialogue before really, and also to do my own work with the edit before really getting into the music. That's the ideal, for me, way to do it. You're not always able to. Sometimes you have to put music in because the project requires it for some reason. But I think that's for me, the best way to do it.
And next one is for Peter Stormvik, but I feel like sound design is so often like an unsung hero of a project, because you have the power to like do everything from creating a totally new sound no one's ever heard, to building out a natural world, to leaning into minimalism or silence, which is a choice in itself, right? So like on Families Like Ours, how did you decide, what to use when in order to serve the story best?
I think it's actually very interesting what Peter Hagen is talking about editing a film or a show without any music to start with, and this concept was something we used a lot on Families Like Ours. Thomas, the director, wanted to have like the music come from the actual scenes, so performed in the scenes, or even a choir or something like that, or come from a radio, so it's more like coming from the environment. And that meant like having no score and kind of figuring out, okay, when let's just edit the whole thing without it. And that obviously gives a lot of opportunities for a sound designer as myself, because like the whole atmospheric, the world building and stuff like that will be kind of a music as well. But it will all start with like for me, it will always start with a spotting session with the director, and even the editor will come in and we'll sit and watch the whole thing through and go through what needs to be, what moments should we look into, what are they having issues with, and if we collaborate while they're editing, which we did on this project, you will have the opportunity to try sound edit and mix something in and see what works, and then go back in the edit and redo it, which is not something we do a lot here in Denmark. I think it's more common, correct me if I'm wrong, in the US, where you kind of do it simultaneously. But for this project, it was very important, the realism of the whole show, because it's a disaster film in slow motion, as Thomas would say. It's not a big Hollywood effecty show. So we need to be with the characters and their natural environments, and then that's the base of the whole thing. So I will build it up like starting from realism and then building certain things underneath that will serve more emotional purposes, and that can be more musical layers, not any in music instruments as such, but tonal layers or stuff that is more subjective and surreal. Often, or in most cases, when I start editing the sounds for it, the material kind of speaks to what it wants you to put on. It will reject certain sounds, or it will say, okay, this environment feels natural, and I welcome this kind of environment. And if you put something on that feels too much, like if I put something very effecty on this project, it will most certainly say no thank you, because this is we need to keep it very based in reality and build from there, and then go into the emotionality of the scenes. So that's kind of how I will start. You kind of accept it, and of course, and it's a collaboration between a lot of talented people from all parts of the making of this show. So it's a big collaboration and talk back and forth all the time. So that's usually how I go about it.
Nice. And Chris, Nightmares of Nature is literally like a Blumhouse produced docuseries that looks at the natural world as if it's a horror film, basically, right? Like
Yeah.
it's such a cool concept. When it comes to shaping that tone, which is so specific, how much falls on music production and you guys versus, principal photography and what's already there by the time that you see it?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, it's a horror show. It's a Blumhouse television horror show, but it's also a nature documentary. So we've worked on a lot of nature documentaries in the past, and on the kind of more traditional nature shows, it's always relying on the score to really carve out a lot of the story. So the score is always very reactive and responsive to whatever the creatures or animals are doing on screen. We kind of always joke it's a little bit like pantomime. If there's a creature and something jumps out, the score is very much dun 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 responsive to what's on screen. But obviously, like I said, it's a horror show, and horror scores generally rely on sparse sounds or even silence to create tension. So the real challenge was finding a balance between telling the story through the music and giving the show what it needed musically, but also leaving the space to create the tension for that horror side of the show, which is pretty much the sort of constant thread through every episode. So that was a case of, like I mentioned earlier, relying on a lot of the sounds and textures and cool idents that we had farmed, and then leaning those into the sound design and leaving space and being respectful to the Foley or sound design that's already in the show. So yeah, I guess the overall challenge was just finding that balance from score to sound design, where we should leave space, where we should really hone in. And I guess we did that by finding these big pivotal moments and then really working around those or building up to them, or leaving the space for suspense in those moments.
That is very cool. That's such a cool idea for a series, and I'm kind of amazed no one has gotten there up until now. Like, of course, it's Blumhouse, but it's awesome. It's
It was
very
a lot
cool.
of fun, yeah, to be honest. We were surprised by that too.
Yeah. Luke, between Runaway and I Fought the Law, you're kind of going from thriller to true crime, drama world.
Yeah.
I know you were talking about kind of some of the similarities between them, but in terms of your work as a composer, like what would you say about your approach is consistent between those projects and other ones that you're on, regardless of genre?
How I always love to start projects, and this is sometimes time dependent, is I remember when I first started exploring the idea of doing film music, and I read this great book by Richard Bellis, who runs an ASCAP workshop, and he mentioned this thing about just having a couple of weeks or even more of just kind of like playtime, where you're not sitting down like trying to be like, okay, I have to produce X amount of minutes of music at the end of the day. There's no kind of expectation, and it's just like you get your instruments out, you get your synths out, you just start messing around with no particular goal. You're just going down a rabbit hole. You know, if a starts kind of interesting, you're like, oh, I just keep following that. And it might not even end up in the show, but often I find it does. And I think I kind of like to do that for a few weeks, and I have a little folder that I'm putting loops that I'm making, or I get a cellist in and we record bits and bobs, and um, over the course of that time, I just kind of slowly build this bookshelf of sounds that I can then draw on in the show. Because often once you start these shows, as we all know, the deadlines and the delivery can be quite rapid. So having that kind of ammunition of all this stuff that I've curated and made and, spent 25 minutes fiddling with an EQ on and losing my mind doing, which you just wouldn't have the luxury of doing when you've got to get through a certain number of minutes a day. I love it. I love doing that. It just really, and I think it helps get you out of a rut of muscle memory as well, because we probably all know that under speed you end up, okay, I'll just go to the same harmonies and the same chords, and I've got my trusty instrument that I like, that I know works. But when you've got that time to start exploring, it just helps you make sure each show kind of has its own identity. So that's how I like to do it.
That's great. And speaking of shows that have their own identity, Jeff, in Palm Royale, I mean, we talked a little bit before the camera started rolling about the musical number with Patti LuPone and your jug playing cameo. But in general, I mean, this show blends orchestral, jazz, kind of Latin influences. It's a period piece. How do you approach composing when you're not just scoring, the characters and their relationships in their lives, but also I feel like you're kind of responsible for establishing the place and time of the show as well.
Luke, I worked with a composer who had a folder that he kept. It was called "Too Good for This Project," and every time he had an idea, and I was always blown away, because the project that he was currently working on was always like a really amazing project, and at any rate, he still had ideas that were too good.
Wow.
And to your question, I think I took on the responsibility to speak to the time and place, just because I thought it would help me generate the sound palette pretty quickly. Now, the other thing that I really wanted to do was to invoke the style of music that was being written at the time. So this show is set in 1969, and so now I wasn't going to record the way that they recorded. I think that's a mistake to try and give myself all the technical limitations of 1969. But I did like the idea of being more strongly, in my opinion, the scores of that time were like more strongly melodic, very very distinctly colored, usually orchestral and organically acoustic based, and also they were leaning into pop music. They were just discovering that you could put pop music in movies and make a lot of money. So I took that on because it's really fun to write leitmotifs and strong themes for characters. It's very very useful. But at the end of the day, I mean, the real work of the music is actually to support the emotion on the screen. I mean, as much fun as it is to speak to the setting, I think it's secondary to the real job that music has in the show, which is like the heart of the story. So yeah, I kind of cheated and said, well, I'm gonna have strong melodies because we have to, because it's 1969 period piece. So and we're gonna do jazz, the four-letter word in film score. My brief was Mancini meets Herman, and but Latin, and so like Bernard Hermano maybe. But the look, this was a place musically to have a lot of fun and to really, really enjoy diving into, the scores, that I think everybody loved from the epoch. So it was a one of a once in a lifetime opportunity that I was happy to and also really, the bar was very, very high. Um, it's not something that's very easy when someone says, "Oh, just do something like Henry Mancini." Um, uh, that's yeah. It just happened that at the turn of the century, I had attended an institute called the Henry Mancini Institute. It was held at UCLA in Los Angeles. It was like summer camp for grown-up musicians, and it was probably the last time someone had asked me to write an orchestral jazz piece of music. So it just happened to have that in my own history, and was able to bring it forward for this show. So it was a nice coincidence.
That's great. Yeah, I was about to say no pressure with those comps, but
Yeah.
you did great. Uh,
Well, thanks.
Peter Hagen, you touched on this earlier. But having done the Jerry Jonas Christmas movie, I know you've also worked on other musical projects. I think I saw Grease, Rise of the Pink Ladies, on your resume, which I watched and enjoyed very much. Um, but what kinds of special considerations do you have to take when you're working on projects that are music heavy in that specific way, where you have musical numbers? And I'm sure everything needs to be synced up perfectly, with the maybe instruments and singers and everything like that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have worked on a number of very music-heavy projects and musicals. And to slightly disagree with something that Jeff just said about the music is there just to support the emotions, I think there are times where the music can be the lead character in scenes. On A Very Jonas Christmas Movie, there's a moment where they're riding on an airplane and the airplane's crashing. And, the crash, we have all these great ad libs from the brothers about how they're going to die and they're freaking out. We have all this great sound design of the plane going out of control and exploding. And then we also had our orchestra. We were lucky enough to have an orchestra record the score for this. They did a great version of Carol of the Bells, and that theme was a leitmotif in the film. And we made the decision on the mix stage to feature that over everything else in that particular moment. That, the sort of the culmination of that musical theme was the most important thing to feature over the ad libs of the brothers, which we did include in there, and you still feel them. But I definitely do think that music can be the lead character of a scene, and certainly when you're working with musical, scenes, performance scenes. As far as like things you need to take into consideration, things that I tend to do is like when I'm working with a lot of songs in a film or an episode of a TV show, is to try to use the stems for the songs in the scenes leading up to them to start to introduce the themes that will be coming, sort of like the way they did in like musicals in the 50s, where like there was a score that was distinct from the songs, but they would weave themes from the songs into the score. I try to do that to give harmony to the overall feeling and sound of it. I also try to work with sound design to find a way into the musical piece that feels natural. And sometimes that can be, like eliminating the sound, like like if you like make things very quiet before the song begins, that can make the beginning of the song feel more dramatic. And there were times where we did like duck things down in the Jonas movie to just like a whisper of wind before the song began.
I think I've got about two more for y'all, but Luke, something you said earlier kind of made me curious when you were talking about having time to kind of play around and think about
Yeah.
things before you know, start composing in earnest. This is kind of for all of you, but how much would you say of your work you do away from the computer? Like in terms of, you know, for the musicians, maybe thinking up themes, thinking up melodies, you know, Peter Hagen, maybe assembling shots in your mind before you're at your workstation. Um, just how much you do anything like that, and does that kind of speed up the process once you are actually, you know, making edits to a file or putting music down?
I don't think I specifically will have a theme just like pop into my head when I'm walking about, but I think it's more of a conceptual thing. Um, like in Runaway, we're playing with different time periods and certain characters that we meet in the present day, and then we go back and we discover various dark secrets about them. And I think at some point I was out for a run or doing something not quite as athletic as that, and had an idea about, oh, I could take some of the instrumentation and percussive rhythms that I'd written for this character and sort of run them through a tape, slow them all down and have them take on a very different tonal quality when they're running at sort of like 30%. And that way we're still maintaining some of the DNA of that character. And that was an idea that I was like, oh, that could be cool. Let's see, go into the studio. Is it actually going to work out well? And it did. It sort of provided a lovely link of two very different facets of this character, but it gave us a musical through line that I wasn't just like writing a completely different style or instrumentation when we go back into the past. So that's probably, yeah, it's more conceptual stuff with me than like specific melodies. That's how I go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the time you spend away from your work can be as valuable as the time you spend with it. I also liked what Luke said earlier about playtime, where it's not necessarily um, working towards a goal, but exploring, sort of the limits of what you have. And that can happen in your head. I do get ideas while exercising. I try to watch something before I like put it down for the day so that it marinates in my head. Um, and It's not so much assembling shots, but maybe like, why is the scene not feeling the way I want it to feel, and what can I do to tilt it in the direction of the feeling that I do want? And that might be like featuring a side character or featuring a particular type of performance that one of the actors is giving that maybe you don't typically focus on, but for this particular scene, it makes sense to do so. So yeah, it's not necessarily specifically like shot arranging, but like thinking about the feeling of scenes and the feeling that you want, and how do you get to that feeling that maybe happens away from the computer.
I always want my controller keyboard to make its own sounds because that gives me, geez, I don't know, half an hour extra every day while you're waiting for the computer to restart or load or unload. The this keyboard always makes I don't have to wait to find a sound to make a sound. It's this makes its own sound, and so that's one thing that I've always required in the writing studios is that this instrument has a slightly acoustic quality. And then the other thing that we did on Palm Royale in particular was I don't want to be limited by my own uh, musical technical limitations. So I would bring in Josh Nelson, who's a fantastic jazz pianist, and I would say, here's my themes, here's my sketches. Can we, just woodshed these, and so he's able to inject all the legit idiom and all the everything's at his fingertips, and his touch is amazing. And I'm lucky I have a nice grand piano out in the living room, and it's a disc clavier, so we can record his performance acoustically and also record the MIDI performance as well. It was a real treat to be able to kind of workshop musical ideas with just seasoned, fantastic jazz musicians. You get to do that a little bit in the studio, but that's so late in the process. I mean, what I think one of the reasons that jazz is so difficult to use in film is because it's very difficult to make convincing demo mock-ups, before the fact. I was lucky that the showrunner on Royale had a lot of faith that it was gonna be great, but that is a lot of faith. So having at least a really really good one or two instruments that are really legit was very helpful.
That's great. Okay, I'm gonna jump to the last one, which is just for each of you, we'll go around, but kind of to wrap it up quickly in your own words, I'd love to hear how you define kind of the core purpose of post-production in general, whether it's kind of polishing something that's already pretty much there, uh, reinterpreting something that, was done in pre and production, or kind of finishing the story in a way that wouldn't otherwise have been possible. Maybe we start with Chris.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess in a roundabout way, on Nightmares of Nature, yes, our goal was to polish the story, or to bring the story to life, if you like, as I mentioned earlier. But at the same time, I guess be disciplined enough and give respect to the other sonic elements in the show. And I touched on it earlier, but quite often we were given these great sections of Foley recordings. In particular, my favorite one is the recordings of mosquitoes. It's so granular, and it's like ear candy. And so actually, if you have that already as the kind of the sonic focus, maybe the score doesn't actually need to do a whole lot of work there. So there's a lot of discipline in sitting back and letting that kind of do its thing, and help the show in that way. But at the same time, maybe taking those sonic elements and reinterpreting it and thinking, well, how can we kind of recreate the sound in the score itself? So that we had a lot of like super fast pizzicato plucked violin textures, which were kind of singing, and this dance around the sound effects, or the Foley of mosquitoes, for example, or these really deep synth growls that really work well with the growls of some of the creatures in the show. So I think, yeah, to the question, I guess you could call that a kind of polish, but it's also just doing a lot of helping the story a lot whilst being respectful to the other sonic elements in the show.
I think that making all these projects that we're all making is very much a team sport. I truly believe it's a conversation between a lot of artists, and some projects may be more artistic in one department or the other, but I truly believe it's a conversation between artists, and together you kind of band together and do something, try and strive for something great together. So I would say it's all of the above, but it depends very much on the project, of course. Like Chris, you talked a lot about like leaving space for Foley and sound effects and stuff like that, and I really believe that in how to like the collaboration between that is very important. So because to me, making sound is very musical. It's just music in disguise. It's everyday sounds, like you said, Chris, a mosquito humming or whatever, can be very like musical in some way. So I think that the way you kind of talk to each other, it will open up things to like polish something, but it can also be like throwing something totally up in the air and doing something totally unexpected and not like happy accidents. We all know those, but it's kind of just discovering, oh, I found something really cool, and it might not be what's really it was intended, but suddenly this idea suddenly pops up because I heard this from the composer, or I saw this from the edit, or it makes me, what if we can move this shot a little, extend it a little bit so we can make this sound, and we can segue into music if we take this sound and kind of pitch it into the score or something like that. I think that's very much a team sport. So post production has a possibility to take whatever you have and just make it as written, but it's also throw the ball up in the air and see what kind of, just toss it around and see what comes out of it. And I think that's just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think on every project, when you're editing picture, there are times where you're polishing, there are times where you are elevating, and then there are times where you're reinterpreting. You know, um, there's never a project that I have done where the script as written is exactly as it ends. So that being said, I always, was very, again, blessed to work with great writers and Isaac Aptaker and Elizabeth Berger on the very Jonas Christmas movie, who wrote a wild and super fun script that gave us a great baseline to work with. And I think at every stage of the process of making a film, which sometimes can take years, you're always looking to elevate. You know what I mean? Until it's, I like something that has always resonated with me is that you're never done editing a film. You just have to stop at a certain point, and I think everyone here would feel the same way about their particular part of that process. So you're always looking to elevate, and I'm sure the people on set who don't work in post production feel the same way. You go until you have to stop.
Who was it that said the great things require? It was Bernstein, right? To achieve greatness, you only need two things: a plan and not enough time. So post production is where we run out of time, and to do what's possible with what we have. I'm always really awestruck to follow the vision of the filmmaker in post. As a team sport, like Peter said, I think the captain gives everybody their marching orders, and so we've been blessed on Palm Royale to work under Abe Sylvia, and I'm always amazed at his ability to keep the entire episode arc, even though we're working on a single scene, and the entire season arc, even though we're working on just a single moment, and be able to shape it, and from every craft's contribution. So yeah, I'm happy to be part of that, and I'm always amazed that the filmmakers are able to let go of the scenes that they lost in the edit, or the shots that they couldn't get because it rained that day. To have all of that in your head, but you can only see what you ended up in the final product. That's amazing, because by the time we come on as composers, we've missed like a year or two of pre-production and production. We don't know what they've been through. We only see what they came away with. So I'm really lucky to work with these guys. And post production is where we do most of our work.
I think the saying is when you're making a film, you make it three times, which is like the script, the shoot, and then in post in the edit. What I love about what we do in general, going off what Peter said and then Jeff as well, is that I think no matter what our particular kind of wheelhouses are, be it editor or sound design or composer, we're all kind of in this world because we love storytelling, and we're all doing it through our own means of expression. And I think what I love about being in the post-production side of things is that feeling. And I had it luckily, particularly on I Fought the Law, where we did post in Soho in London, that right from the beginning, we all decided that we were going to do all of our spot meetings in person, and all the way to the final dubs, of just the executive producers like Liza Marshall and the director Eric Richter Strand and the writer Jamie Crichton. We were all in the same room, sitting there. We're looking at the cuts of the show, and everybody is kind of unified in that purpose of like, okay, how can we just make this the best story we possibly can? We've shot it, can we snip a scene here? Can we put some music here? Can we do a tweak with some ADR on the dialogue to make it work better? Like, what can we all do collectively in post to just get the audience or ourselves to just lean in and be like, oh, okay, this is like, I don't know why, but there's an alchemy now to this scene that it just clicks with me. And I think none of us you can't write like an equation to be like, okay, if you edit a scene like this and you score it like this, then it's going to send a shiver up your spine. I think that's what's so exciting about post is, I'm sure Jeff and Chris and Peter have all had it, where you put a piece of score up to a scene or a bit of sound design, and suddenly, for reasons you can't explain, you're just like, oh, that's cool. And I wasn't expecting that, and I can't explain why it's cool. And you put it in and you send it off to the director, and they may have the same reaction, and it's just great. And I'm always chasing that feeling of the like, ooh, something's changed about this scene now for the better. And I think that's the beauty of post, and like I think I said at the beginning, and what everyone else has said, everyone's on the same team, and we're all just trying to make the best piece of storytelling. It's like the modern version of sitting around a campfire and all like telling a story and then iterating on it together to build the best thing. So I don't know if that entirely directly answers your question, but I think, yeah, it can be a mix of polishing or reinvention. It's just whatever we can do to make it the best it can possibly be.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a great way to wrap it up. I think that's our time. I would like to thank all of you, Chris Elmslie, Peter Stormvik, Peter Hagen, Jeff Toyne, Luke Richards, for being here, talking about your projects. And thank you to Impact 24 PR for putting this all together and having us all. And to everyone who's watching, thanks for spending your time with us. And we'll see you next time.